so much for taking the time to chat with us on the Allsorts podcast.
Absolutely. I'm so happy to be here. We've been wanting to do this for a while, so yeah, I'm really happy that we got the time in.
And I was trying to think, like, when was the very first time I met you? Like, in my memory, I feel like it's the dinner that you and Zach hosted, like
Right.
a few years ago. I think that's the very first time that we ever like got to chat and sit down with each
Officially.
other.
Yeah,
Yeah.
officially face to face. I think that was the first time. But in the world of social, we met already.
I know it's, for all of my love-hate relationship with it, when people you get to know online become
hmm
people you know offline, like that's when I'm like, oh, we can actually build community on this wackadoodle app.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It took an adjustment, but it's definitely a great tool. And
Yeah.
yeah, I continuously just meet so many great connections. And then there's nothing like it when you do meet in person though. You know, from digital to in person. Yeah, because
Yeah.
I think that is how we met. And of course it's through Zach.
Yeah, of course. Our mutual friend
Yeah,
Zach, who is such a connector and
such a
community
connector.
builder
Yeah,
in his own right. Like my little
definitely.
introvert heart is always like, I wish I could be more like that.
He's so great at it.
Yeah,
So great. Yeah.
that's so true. I wanted to talk to you for so many reasons. I love what you're doing at Kula. You are also just this like incredible light, and I want people to hear from you, hear your perspective on things, hear your story. So I feel like we should start at like the very beginning,
Okay.
which is like growing up. Like, what was little Asha like? What was the role that food played in your life?
I love that question. For me, I was always an introverted kid, very quiet, very observant. I was surrounded by family, so a lot of people in my life. So I grew up in Kenya, and lived with my grandparents for I would say for 8 years, and in a very rural area where it's like your family is your community. You have different family members that live around you, um, and it's really culturally centered, in a very rural town. The town is called Isiolo in Kenya, and yeah, I was very like observant. I think that's one of the things I noticed, and where I grew up, there's a lot of storytelling and a lot of conversations with elders. So I spent a lot of time with elders in my community. Um, and so food also kind of was embedded in that in terms of uh, things that I think I definitely took away in my experience is that communal sharing experience. Um, and just like as a kid, observing and being part of it, of course, but observing how um, like my family was able to use like as ingredients like grains, that turn into flour. You kind of see that process, and I saw that with my mom as well here in Canada, where she really made food from scratch. We barely saw a lot of like ready-made food that came in, and so that's what stood up for me is like the labor of love around food, and that communal experience for sure. But yeah, I was like, it's not timid, but very observant, very, very observant.
Well, and I think with all of that family life swirling around you as well, like what
hmm
was your role as a child? Like, was it very much the elders preparing the food, or did the kids get involved? Did you get involved? What was that like?
Yeah. Oh no, kids got involved.
Yeah.
You learned, so just to kind of paint a clearer picture. So I grew up in a very rural town where, beyond like the labor of love around food, you labor to get water, you labor to grow your food. Animals were, taken care of on our communal property. And part of that is also learning how to cook at an early age. And so like it was quite ingrained really early on. From basics of, cooking some of our staples like chapati or, even how to cut vegetables. Yeah, very, very much involved. And I think as growing up and coming to Canada, I always played an older sister role. So, yeah, nurturing and being involved in food preparation has always been, yeah, part of my life and I guess my identity in some ways. hmm
I I had, the similar experience of like with my grandmother. So
Yeah.
our house was, it revolved around food. Like breakfast was made, breakfast was cleaned up, and then lunch got started. And it
Yeah.
was,
Yeah.
obviously different because I grew up here in Canada, but like that idea that like food was the clock. It was the
Absolutely.
clock of daily life. Like it's like we gathered, we we pulled apart, we gathered again, we pulled apart. At what age
Definitely.
did you come to Canada, and how did you sort of reconcile your food life in Kenya coming to Canada? Because you said your mother still cooked mostly everything from scratch. Like, were you
Hmm.
exposed to like, what are all these weird boxes and things in the supermarket?
Right?
Like, what do I do with these?
Yeah, it's a funny story. So, like, again, um, coming from Isiolo, I remember, so I was traveling with my brother my mom was already in Canada when I joined her and my siblings. Um, and there was like on the plane, they presented this yellow thing wrapped in plastic, and now I know it as cheddar cheese at that time. And it was the strangest thing to see this plastic presented as food. And that's all I saw. I was 10 years old, right? So I'm looking at, or I was 11 years old looking at this plastic wrapping. And my brother knew a little better. He was older. So he was like, this is cheese. I was just like staring at it, didn't eat it.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I found it quite bizarre with the packaged food overall, and then just the concept of, I didn't grow up on cheese, so like that was one
Yeah.
thing that was surprising. Um, what was the other thing? I think buying milk at like I think even grocery, the idea of the way grocery was introduced to myself, that was a bit of a shock. And of course, everything is boxed up or in bags or cartons. Wasn't used to it. Like even the milk that was presented in Kenya, like where I grew up, it was in a neighborhood, and there was a glass jar of some sort that it was contained in, which was often reused. So that's yeah, it's the packaging was interesting, which translated to food. And um, I think the biggest thing for me was also how we consumed. It was always on the go, like the idea of like
Mm.
even how lunch was enjoyed at school, and the fact that it's pre-packed. Now I have two kids, and in that I'm packing their lunch every single day, and it's mostly cold items that they're eating. And I was really accustomed to hot food. It's warm versus cold, sandwich.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was quite a culture shock for me. Like never had burgers. I didn't have a burger, and this is the first time I'm actually talking about it. I can't believe it. I didn't have a burger till I was probably 11 or 12 years old, right?
Yeah.
It's wild.
That is wild.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
I
So definitely a shock. I would say it was a shock to the system.
And what were some of your favorite foods growing up? And then when you came to Canada, like which one of our Canadian staples were you like, oh yeah, this is all right. I can get behind this.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. My favorite food to this day is going to be, we consider this the port. It's considered a staple in certain places, in certain regions in Kenya, but it's called sukuma wiki no gali, and it's like a poor person's food. It's supposed to be one of the most accessible items. It's essentially cornmeal that's been cooked into consistency, like a dough, and it becomes like a utensil that you eat with sauteed veg, and it could be collard greens. That's my favorite, but it could be also cabbage, kale, any leafy green. You could add proteins in there. So that's always been my go-to, and that's my go-to when if I'm cooking just for myself. That's I'm good with that. Um, what was Cheerios specifically with milk was the first thing that I was like, okay, this reminds me a little bit of porridge, but a little more texture. So I really got interested in that. Yeah, that stands out for me. What else was it? The first year was really hard for me. The adjustment
Yeah.
yeah, I really didn't um, adjust as easily. I would say pizza eventually. I really, I love bread. I love bread. And so pizza was one of definitely Cheerios, and then pizza.
Universal food. Growing up,
Yeah,
I disliked cereal so much,
really.
and all I wanted was because I would see on the Saturday morning cartoons that there would be toys, and so I
Mm,
would, like, beg my grandparents or my mom to buy cereal, and they say, "You
yeah.
never eat it." I was like, "Oh, I'm gonna eat it this time," and, like, every single time, Saturday morning, into the box. I just dumped
Toys.
it all out
Yeah.
into a big bowl and grabbed the toy
That
and
just
put it
that's
all
all you
back.
wanted. That's all you want. It's a prize, right? It's the prize for
Yeah.
sure. Yeah.
Yeah, and then all the grown-ups had to eat the cereal.
Of course, of course.
Um, you're fully vegan now,
I am.
but were were your sort of like the foods of your upbringing largely plant-based? Like, at what point were you like, "Oh, maybe plants are the thing?" Like, was meat a big
Hmm.
thing growing up? At what point did you decide to pull away from that?
Okay, so in Kenya, you mostly eat vegetarian, so it's mostly veg heavy because it's accessible. At least where in the northern part, that's we lived off the land mostly, um, and then animal consumption, because here's the thing, I had a very different relationship with animals because my grandfather and some of my family members also had animals. I'll talk a little bit about my ancestors. So they were nomads that originated from Ethiopia and Somalia, and a lot of them settled mostly in the northern parts of East Africa, Kenya specifically, where a lot of them are. They traveled with the animals, they herded animals, like goat, sheep, and so that continued on. And I grew up raising animals with my grandfather, and it's often like it was the currency in terms of trade. So trade for land, trade for food, businesses. So that was the purpose of it. And like so, consumption of animals were typically it occurred when there was some sort of a celebration. It could be a wedding, it could be a transition in life, coming of a certain age. So there was a difference for me because I got to know these animals as a kid, right? Um, and so yeah, I didn't consume a lot of meat. And at that point, I didn't really connect. Oh, yes, I knew animals were, consumed because I definitely ate chicken and all that. Um, and so moving forward, coming to Canada, I noticed it was way more meat heavy, right? So some of the foods I grew up eating that were meat heavy at that period was like injera, which is a staple in it's Ethiopian dish that usually has a stew that is meat based. There are some vegetarian options, but in the household often there was a lot of like goat and beef and chicken. Um, where I really felt, but then the funny thing is, the fillers were still a lot of vegetables
Mhm.
because again, my mom cooked a lot of whole foods. She really raised us on whole foods diet, like and vegetables, grains, whole grains. She was very mindful of that. So we had a pretty good mix. But as I got older, I think like I would say late teens to mid 20s, it became like fully a lot of North American food, which is burgers, pizza, all involved all types of meat. And that's when my body kind of restarted reacting.
Mm.
So around the time I was 25, I noticed I would get like my system just kind of would shut down. I'd have a lot of heartburn. I wouldn't digest food very well. And so then I stopped consuming red meat as an initial step and then chicken. And this went on for 2 years, but again, didn't really connect. I was like red meat for some reason that came up often when I went to see my doctor.
Yeah.
Um, and then I kind of fell back again, and I would consume more meat than I really should have. And what's interesting is I'll actually get to that point because there's a whole circle. Okay, there's a full circle with this.
I love it.
Um, but when I moved to Vancouver in 2015, I had I wouldn't say spiritual awakening, but there was like some sort of a reconnection. I met my husband, who's my husband now, and I met his family, and his mother was a pretty long-term vegan, or more plant forward, so she did not consume animals for over 9 years. My brother-in-law, who was an act, he was an activist and like really, showed me. I kind of learned just by listening to some of their stories, and we had some really interesting conversations, and it kind of brought me back to that period where I was like, oh, my system was just not managing consuming animals, very well, and I was getting the warnings, and I kind of listened to my instincts for a bit, and then I kind of stepped back. Um, so that was like my first step. 2015 is when I really started, like just removing, any animal-based food off my plate, and I just started feeling really great. Um, at the same time, I was new to Vancouver, and being a
Mhm.
foodie, I like, and being an introvert, the best way for me to meet friends is like and bring them to my home. And so I started cooking, and that's how Zach and I met, actually. And so I would make some of like my traditional foods plant-based, and it was really great. The cooking experience changed. It was much faster,
Mhm.
a lot more enjoyable for sure, and exciting. There was a lot of excitement around it. Um, and I think what's interesting is that's what brought me to starting Kula. Like Kula has always been a plant-based, a vegan brand. So in some ways there was like a great connection there of a journey that I needed to sort of experience.
Mhm.
So fast forward, it was a year ago. My doctor did the usual testing to make sure everything's good during the checkup, and then she calls me. First off, you get the email, or I got a notification that my doctor wants to talk to him. I'm like, oh, this is not
Oh,
good.
no. And then
What's
you
the
freak
matter?
out for however
I'm
many
freaking out. I'm
days you
like
have to.
searching everything, research. Oh, what could be wrong? Um, and it turns out that I have high cholesterol, and I naturally produce, because she does,
Mhm.
she understands that I am on a plant-based diet, and I don't consume anything necessarily that should be producing
Yeah.
cholesterol. And so she was like, yeah, it seems like it could be genetic. You may genetically be producing this much. And I kind of adjusted a couple of things in terms of exercise and, the usual. But I had a moment of thought. I'm like, oh, so I needed to do this. I needed to change, because like considering, thinking of my late teens to mid
Mhm.
20s, I was really not eating I wasn't eating for my benefit. Like it wasn't really helping me. And I may have at some point ignored some of the signs. And so if I continued on, who knows what would have happened, right? So that was kind of a shock. But then on the more spiritual sense, it's like I've never felt so aligned, with the change. And so I do say I'm vegan. I do believe, learning. I think having my eyes opened from family and seeing their perspective, in the sort of impact we could have by, you know, simply deciding not to consume beyond just food that we consume, but choosing not to consume animals in our daily lives has been like the biggest thing. And yeah, I always think about that now. I'm like, this had to happen.
Oh gosh, like there's so much that I want to unpack there on so many levels.
Yeah,
But like,
yeah, yeah.
I mean, the first and most basic is that people forget that about cholesterol, that our body makes cholesterol, particularly on the like, you know, animal slash
Yes,
wellness people side where they're like, oh, your body needs cholesterol to make hormones. It's like, no, your body makes enough of it. Thank you very much. Sometimes too much, but
too
like
much.
enough.
Yeah.
You do not need to eat cholesterol to make cholesterol. And that's why, particularly too, some people might be surprised. We're like, oh, how does a vegan have high cholesterol? Well, because your body makes it. And genetically,
Hmm.
some of us
Hmm.
just make a lot of it.
Exactly. I didn't even consider, I did not consider, as a vegan, I didn't even consider that. Um, yeah. So
And I think,
it was very interesting. And you're right, like we just don't talk about it.
we do a disservice,
Hmm.
and I think for so many of us, because we're so excited about living this way, about making
Yeah.
these choices that are aligned with our values, that we feel are better for animals, better for the planet. We want to sort of paint this utopian picture of as soon as you're vegan, you'll never get sick again, or like nothing will ever happen. It's like, well, no, our bodies still have their own unique genetics. Our lives have all of these factors, whether we're stressed or,
Yes.
maybe we're not taking the time to cook whole foods, take care of ourselves. I think it's so important for us to be open and transparent that,
Hmm.
yes, we can be healthy. Yes, we can really, really love our choices, but also sometimes things just happen.
Yep,
Yeah.
absolutely. Still a
Yeah.
human, still go through everything. And just because you've changed your diet, or not your diet, your lifestyle to veganism. I mean, I definitely went through my phase, right? Like I first was consuming things that I was really ingredients that I was very comfortable with, like lentils, beans, whole grains. It was not foreign to me. And then it was like all the experimenting, with um, so like plant-based meats, processed meats, um, lots of burgers,
Hmm.
a lot of burgers. Um, and I think at this point now it's like a mix of everything, right? So you do go through all these transitions, and I wouldn't say like I was on my healthiest of all point, but I definitely would say like the first bit, I saw the difference in the way my system worked, and so that was encouraging, and it allowed
Yeah.
me to really like intentionally understand what I was doing. Whereas like in my mid 20s, when I decided to not consume certain animals, um, I didn't know what I was doing except that, oh, I wasn't feeling well, and I couldn't identify what the issue was, and I didn't take that time to even have a long conversation with my doctor. All I took
Yeah.
away was, you might get ulcer in the future, this and this and this, and I was like, okay, let's cut this one out, and then cut this one out, and it felt good temporarily.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's a lot more to it, and there's a lot of instincts for sure, but also there's a lot of help there in terms of your health side.
Totally. And I think so
Yeah.
often we go it alone. I mean, I know as a
Yes.
dietitian, I'm like, I see people going it alone and like, oh, I'll just cobble together some information from the internet and like, that's all I need. And it's like, well, no,
Guilty.
yeah. you know,
Guilty.
yeah, we all do it. So
We
like,
all do it.
I don't do it for nutrition, but then I'm like, oh,
Hmm.
what's this thing on my elbow? And like, let me just
Hmm.
Google that.
Yeah.
I want
Yeah.
to talk more about starting Kula.
Yes.
Um, One, because I'm always so in awe of anyone who has the nerve to start a consumer packaged goods business.
Whew.
But you know, more than that, Kula really feels like a representation of you and what you want to put out in the world and sort of that journey that you are on. So, what was it like actually getting Kula off the ground?
I like to start with, I had no idea what I was doing. I
Thank you
was
for that.
very, very naive. Still don't know what I'm doing, but I getting started with Kula was like meeting, folks like Zach, who were like, oh, this is interesting. And then observing the landscape in Vancouver and seeing so many great food options. For me, I wanted for myself, like I wanted Caribbean, East African, West African food, and I didn't really see much of it that's plant-based. I could say right now in Canada specifically, I just didn't see it, but at that time in Vancouver. Um, and so my background is in telecom for 15 years, and my daughter was just born, a year before we launched. And so I was kind of at the crossroads of thinking about what's next. Now my life has changed. I now have a human little being that I need to take care of. I have to consider her food. I have to think about the time, what kind of time. My time is no longer all mine. I've got to be thoughtful to that. And then of course, like, am I loving what I'm doing? And I was doing really well, but the passion wasn't there for it. There wasn't a direct alignment. Um, and so, yeah, food was presented as in like, hey friends, try this out, and to this is interesting. And so I took some time. during that year of mat leave, and I attended BCIT for a couple of months just to do some research and build a business plan, because I didn't know where to start with the food business. And then Zach kind of tapped me on the shoulder and was like, "Hey, you could do a couple pop-ups." And so we at that time I had a business partner. We tried that out. It was amazing. Really great turnout for these events. And then farmers market just kind of organically landed during a conversation with one of my classmates, and I went ahead and applied at UBC. They accepted us in, and the Vancouver farmers market. So we launched there with stews, because that's what I like. I consume stews a lot, and like you could do so much with it. And so we introduced that and sauces, and it was really for me at that period. I was still kind of in the research phase of, does this make sense?
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, I mean, remember the first day in a commercial space, just looking at this huge burner that I've never, I didn't even know how to turn on. We specifically started really late when there weren't many people in the kitchen, because we were afraid of getting in everyone's way and
Mhm.
like uh, potentially burning the building down.
Small chance.
Just small little chance. Who knows? It took us a while to just figure out how to turn everything on. Um, but yeah, it was like going in with, in some ways, like the research helped, because I have to, like, I like to know what's ahead, generally, as the person that I am. But on the other side, I had no idea what I was doing. And I was kind of like, let's test this out, let's see what happens, and socialize it. But yeah, it was just like the need for, I wanted to see more plant-based food options. And at that time, I didn't even know the route we were going to go. If like CPG was kind of the thought, but we knew events made sense, because we needed to tell the story. And like it's in some ways a new concept of food for a lot of folks in Vancouver. And so that's where we wanted to focus on. It's like, let's tell the story, let's get in front of as many people as possible, and then see what happens. And that's how it started. Went from like farmers market to catering and meal prep services. We did everything. And then finally 2020, yeah, we ramped up on the meal services, because in 2020 we all went through a whole new world, and that digital world that folks were not necessarily able to just go into. We weren't able to go to restaurants, and so we introduced online shopping with meals and packaged goods, and organically started to like understand that we can reach more people by getting these products on shelves. What I wasn't prepared for was the road that's ahead.
Yeah.
And I mean, anyone that's launched a CPG brand understands the nuances of it. It's quite challenging. It's one of the toughest market, like, industries to break into, and stay relevant. But there is a need. So I think identifying the needs of what's needed in the market is what's keeping us going. And so that's where we are now. We are heavily focused on CPG and food service, in working with restaurants and food establishments to offer a wider variety of plant-based options.
Well, and I think one of the things that makes Kula so special is that, it is a really fresh flavor and a new voice. When there's like 75 million potato chips and like 75 million tea brands, your sauces and your flavors are new for many
Hmm.
palates, which, and
That's
I
right.
know in Vancouver we think of ourselves as very diverse, but we're not. Like, Toronto is the most diverse city in Canada, like
Yeah.
by far and away. And people
Hmm.
get far more exposure to different cultures and different flavors. And do you find yourself frustrated at times having to say, well, here's what it is? Like, here's what the flavor is, here's
Definitely.
what it is. Yeah.
Absolutely. It's like the exciting part is you're introducing we get to introduce flavors that someone has not experienced, like, and I love doing that. There we often we get pushback of like, oh, this is too different. And I wouldn't say it's specifically from consumers or our like customers. sometimes indirect customers. It's more the buyers and distributors and the retailers that are just like, oh, nope, this won't sell well. The flavor profile is a little unknown, or and in this case, it's also plant-based. It's like someone said once to us last year, when we started to we were researching and like looking for distributors that we can work with. And they specifically were like, this is too nichey. And when I hear that, it's like, okay, define that. What is the nichey part? Is it the plant-based, which is it's a growing a segment. More and more folks are incorporating more plant-based, and more people are looking for diverse food options. They want different flavors. And so like where we're challenged with is the unwillingness, specifically
Mhm.
in Canada. I would say, even though yes, Toronto is diverse, it's like there is still a roadblock with getting on shelf. Not because consumers don't want to see that, it's more buyers are a little more resistant to change or incorporating more options. Um, I really enjoyed farmers market because like you get to meet folks that have experienced the food and those who have not. And at the end of the day, there's something that it could be like that familiarity that brings them in, or that excitement of something new, but also like considering how it makes them feel, and
Mhm.
so there's a lot of intention in terms of how we produce the food. So yeah, it's an ongoing battle, and we pick and choose which one we go after. But it's definitely an extra step that it takes us a bit longer to get on shelf. It'll take us a little more to move it off shelf because pili pili may not resonate. It probably won't resonate with a lot of people.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and yet when you say we have this really delicious hot sauce, and it's
Yeah.
and it's it's so interesting as someone coming from my very first job as
Mhm.
my only like quote unquote real job is how
Yeah.
I say it. I actually worked in grocery. And so I
Okay. Wow.
remember seeing entrepreneurs come with their brands and be like, this is so amazing. You have to put it on your shelf. And,
Yeah.
everyone would sort of like have their champions, like, I want to fight for this. This is so good.
Hmm.
We have to bring it in. And, I think one of the biggest challenges is there's so much noise out there. And yet Kula represents something that's plant-based, which absolutely everyone wants. That's like these incredible flavors, because I think people are also really searching for that too. Because there's this idea that
Yeah.
plant-based is somehow boring or plain, and foods like the ones that you offer at Kula are so different. Like we're like, no, it is not boring. It is not plain. Like it's going to make you very excited to eat plant-based food, and like that's
Yeah.
what gets me really excited.
Yeah. I mean, and there's so many great products and brands out there that are doing that. But yeah, I think it's the change. Like I think as humans, we just are so resistant to change, and it shows up in so many different ways. Um, but we're pushing. I mean, we're continuing, and there's some. I mean, we've had some good steps, and I know right now for a lot of CPG brands, it's really tough. It's a tough industry to get in, and we now have to consider an additional layer with inflation, but also just affordability is another thought. And as one of the brands that are not subsidized by the government, we still need to consider our cost as well, and the additional cost of distribution costs and brokerage, all of it. So yeah, but it's not. I've definitely like I am sold on um, anyone that has tried. If it serves them, they're coming back, and so we're
Mhm.
just kind of like navigating. How do we ensure that it gets to the right people and potential someone that needs this or would want this in their lives? Um, yeah.
I I so appreciate you mentioning that, like, you really didn't know what you were doing, because I think that for anyone out there listening who's thinking about potentially starting their own business, they might think that I'm not ready, or I don't
Hmm.
know enough, or I don't have anyone in my life who opened a clinic or who started a packaged goods business, so I can't do it myself. And
Yeah.
I'm wondering, throughout this process, as Kula has grown and changed and evolved, like, what have you learned about yourself in the process of being an entrepreneur?
Ooh, wow. Um, I never thought I was a risk taker, but I'm a risk taker. I put a lot on the table, like just I think lifestyle change of being in a very cushy job situation, 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, with all the benefits, earning a pretty comfortable amount of income and all the accolades. Like I literally walked away from that. So that's one big thing. Like, and then I have children, and I have to consider that I thought, okay, so this is the naive part of myself was like, oh, I'm gonna start a business so I can have more time with my family, and it's quite the opposite actually.
Yeah.
The opposite that's happened. And so, yeah, I think I definitely I'm a risk taker on my personal note. And I and I learned a lot. I think being an entrepreneur, I never thought I was going to be an entrepreneur. Like, as an immigrant who is part of a family where my mom was a single mom and she was a refugee woman who had to figure it out and she had many kids, and so like survival was the biggest part for her. I definitely did not want to have that kind of I didn't want the same journey for my children. And so I often chose the safest form of life, including the type of work I did and like how I partook in life altogether. But being an entrepreneur definitely changed that for me. And I can see what the long-term gain is, but like that journey has like opened me up to the amount of people you like, the richness of people you gain in your life is wild, and you learn so much. Like I learned about accounting. I was never great at math. It's never great at math. Give me books, I'll read it, I'll tell stories, but I cannot, but that's one of the things I had to kind of get over. And you learn how to research. You're working with people every day, supplying, like looking for, I don't even know how we got to the point of finding the suppliers that we work with who are all so incredible. So there's so much going on. Today I'm going to be like seeing 4 different people, and moving around, and I'm going to have to manage my time. So that's like the biggest thing. It's like, I do enjoy risk taking, and I see the rewards of it, and it doesn't have to be money. And most of the
Mhm.
time, it's not actually money, because being an entrepreneur does not mean you're going to make money either. That's that's the other part. But you gain so much. There's so much that comes to you, and alignment, just a natural alignment that I've been able to find with it. I can never work. I don't, not to say I can never work for anyone, but I wouldn't be the best employee.
It kind of ruins. I remember
Hmm.
seeing somewhere that an entrepreneur is someone who will work 80 hours a week just to avoid working 40 hours a week for someone else.
Yeah,
I was like, "Oh, yeah, I feel a bit
yeah,
tagged by that one." But it's
yeah.
true.
It's
It's
true.
true.
It's true.
There's
And I
something
get, I
about
get why. Hmm.
seeing that vision you put out into the world actually manifest itself and have an impact
Yeah.
on other people's lives, and which is probably a good time to ask you, like, what is your vision for the future? What do you see? Like, how do you want Kula to evolve? Because I noticed on your Instagram last week, that you just announced this project to help plant trees in your native Kenya. So tell us a little bit more about that, and like, where else do you want this to go?
Oh my gosh, I'm trying not to be emotional, but like when Very Tree reached out to us, it was just wild because you have folks reaching, because we are a brand that is really focused on sustainability. We didn't want to just provide vegan food. It's like, or vegan forward food, plant-based. We wanted something that really did a little more good. Hey, Zach and Dean, a little more good, right? And when this is what's so exciting when you take a step in starting a brand. And one of the 4 pillars those 4 pillars, and they still remain, is sustainability and community. Community and sustainability are the main ones that have really stuck. And so when Very Tree reached out, they just like you get used to a lot of emails where there's the realness and alignment, and then there's the we're sustainable and da 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 da, and like then you start reading into it and you like look at the details, and it it's more it's not as net positive. So what stood up for us was the fact that there was a lot of visibility in terms of what Very Tree does with planting trees, but the big step for me is like what it does for the community. At the end of the day, like people are still central in this, and I was very excited. And then to learn that there was an opportunity. I've always wanted. I'm from a very small town where resources are not necessarily coming in, and community really comes up with their own resource, and they just figure it out. And so when they reached out to us and we found out we could be in a particular region, it was a no-brainer for me that it be Kenya. And the fact that jobs can be created out of this, it has a full circular motion that off for the ecosystem, and it just has a long-term opportunity for the best impact. It's one of the first steps that I think naturally in the back of my mind, I knew that I've always wanted to be a part of this. And so, yeah, we're very excited for that. And we're one of many brands that are as a small, like, I don't want people to think we're a company. We're not making a lot of money, right? But a small impact of someone going on our website and purchasing a product goes a long way. And no matter what, we're actually contributing. But in this way, we're able to do this as a community, both from here and the larger community globally. And so, yeah, we're going to continue focusing on that and widen our network of support and kind of giving back to it, not just taking, is the big thing for me and for my team. We are currently working on our B Corp certification as well,
That's so
which
cool.
is, yeah, thank you. It's centered around community for sure and culture. I think we might be one of the first brands that are looking at arts and culture specific to bringing food of African diaspora to a more mainstream, because it is a missing point for us in Canada. And there are more and more folks that are traveling and migrating to Canada who still need access to food that could be reminding them of home, and of course our communities here that want more. And so, yeah, it's a close alignment with the kind of work we want to be doing. Personally, I've started diving into, like, in those 15 years in telecom, I focused on coaching and people management. And I want to say I've learned a lot about entrepreneurship, and specifically in the food business. And so, yeah, I'm trying to find a path where we could help newer businesses as well as they're, starting up, because like I didn't know anything. And luckily, I met some incredible people that opened my eyes to some of the things I could do and just like help me through this journey. So I really want to lean into that on my own personal side. And as far as Kula growth is going across Canada, we actually will be. When is this episode going live?
This will go live in October.
Okay, perfect. So by October, everyone will know that you're the first person I'm saying this in public forum. Is we're going to be in Whole Foods this year in Toronto and Vancouver.
That's so awesome.
Yeah,
Congrats.
thank you so much. We're just so excited, and so our goal is to continue the expansion across Canada. We have a couple of more updates coming up, and we are starting to think, like, I didn't think 5 years ago that there was a potential thought of even going global, but yeah, we're gonna strive for that. Canada, US, and yeah, around the world, just to offer more plant-based options, more culturally relevant food, and really just speak to the love of food and what it does, in the ways that we connect. That's the future of Kula right
I
now.
love it.
That's what it
And the
looks
future
like.
is bright.
The future is bright. The future is bright, and it's plant-based.
Okay, I feel like this is the perfect time to switch into the rapid fire
Okay.
questions.
Ooh.
And we're going to keep it focused on food.
Okay.
And I'm going to force you to pick favorites. What are some of your favorite spots to eat in the city?
Okay, my favorite spots to eat chickpea. If I'm going for brunch, juice truck. If I'm getting my juice, I got my juice today at home, so I'm gonna chug that down. But juice and like anything I want to have to go quick. Mila, if I'm sitting down. And oh, to live for bakery, all my baked goods, all the cakes. So I like, yeah, that's I go to a lot of plant-based spots, and those are some of my favorites. Rise Up if I'm looking for um, products from community. If I'm
Mhm.
getting my patties, Elbow Patties is there. So that's where I'm going. I'm sorry if I'm missing anyone here.
You can always email me and we can add it to the
Yeah,
show
yeah,
notes.
yeah,
I
yeah.
discovered elbow patties through Kula, and they're
Hmm.
one of our family's favorites.
The best, the best,
Everybody loves my
the
kids love
best.
everybody loves them.
And Chris is the best who makes them. Yeah,
Amazing.
yeah.
Okay, so speaking of, what are your kids' favorite foods?
My kid's favorite. So
Mhm.
Halima likes hot dogs. Yeah, they've gone through all the different transitions. Like they
Mhm.
love the stews, but yeah, hot dog, a nice vegan hot dog. Um, Luca's got my heart. He loves bread. Any like sort of bread, he's leaning into that. You can make a gourmet food for him, but it's the bread.
Always. Kids love
Anything
it.
bread.
I
Anything bread.
mean, why wouldn't you? It's a perfect food,
It is. It's
essentially.
pretty amazing.
Okay, if money were no object, the next place you'd want to travel.
Oh, um, yeah, Kenya. Kenya is definitely, yeah, on the list there for a month.
Your favorite nature spot in Vancouver.
You know what? Simple Trout Lake. I just love. We were just there yesterday. Halima had their first lemonade stand. But you can walk. It's an easy stroll. You could sit down there. The ducks are out. So Trout Lake for me.
It's the East Van Gem. It's
It's the
like,
East Van Jam. That's where
yeah,
we're in East Van as well. So it's easy. We spent a
yeah.
lot of time there.
They have a really good playground, like a
They
really
do.
good playground.
Playgrounds. They have multiple
True.
playgrounds, which is so amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
And then you
of
can
all
feed the
for all
ducks.
ages, and you can feed the ducks.
Yeah. So if you're not from Vancouver, Trout Lake, Trout
Trout
Lake
Lake,
Farmers Market, if we're going to
trout,
combine both worlds,
exactly,
if you're here in the
exactly.
summer, don't miss the Trout Lake Farmers Market. It's a
Not,
gem.
yeah, the best, and so close to Commercial Drive, which is another area that I like. I love spending time in.
I love this neighborhood.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Last one. In this imaginary world where you've got 20 minutes all to yourself and you're not allowed to be productive,
Hmm.
in your work, in your homework, what do you do? 20 minutes all for yourself.
So 20 minutes, what I typically like to do is movement, any movement. I know you do nothing, but I like to start my day that way, in the morning. So it could be a couple of, stretches, or it could be dance. But that's the ideal thing for me.
It's such a
Yeah,
game changer to put that into your day and just like
absolutely.
flush the brain. I feel like that's what it's doing. Like as I sweat,
Yeah,
it's like
it
my
feels
brain
it.
that's
I
flushing.
feel it. That's what I feel. I feel it, and then everything is light, and I can move a bit
Yeah,
lighter. And I could feel the difference when I don't do that. And I try to do that almost every single day.
totally.
Yeah,
Amazing.
yeah.
Well, Asha, thank you so much for sharing all of your experience and like all of this inspiration for any budding entrepreneurs out there who want to start their own business. You can do it, and sharing the magic of Kula with us.
Absolutely. Desiree, thank you so much. I'm in awe of you, and I love everything you put out. And I think what I love is just the honesty. It's like considerations of like imperfections. Nothing is perfect.
Mm,
And I really, I love, it's always refreshing when I see what you put out there. So thank you for having
mm,
me.
it is my
I'm so
pleasure.
glad we got to talk.